Right. So once your diameter pair has been created, the next part is to create a diameter link group. And what a diameter link group is basically you create a link between your local GUI hostname and the OCS server. So the first group name is basically linking your local host name with OCS1, and then the next diameter connection group is basically connecting your local host name to your peer is OCS2. So if you have multiple, if you have three OCS, you're going to have a third one added. Okay. So configuration of link group is basically connecting a link between your local and your peer. Next is creating a diameter link. In diameter link is basically you are mapping your diameter connection group with a local interface. Okay. So basically, if you want to, if so, so if this PGW wants to communicate with this OCS, it is going to communicate via this local interface. So adding a diameter connection is essential in order to ensure that you have an active connectivity between your local host and your peer node. Right. Next is creation of an OCS group. So as I mentioned that you can create an OCS group and you can add multiple OCS into it. So you add an OCS group and then you add multiple OCSs into this OCS group. And plus, if you're adding multiple OCSs into this, you have the option of assigning a weight so that, okay, if I'm sending this traffic to this OCS group, so what percentage of traffic goes to OCS1 and what percentage traffic goes to OCS2? If you set a weight of an OCS to 0, no traffic is going to go over there. So that is basically how you offload your OCS. Instead of removing the OCS, you basically set it straight to 0. Next, okay, so this part covers how your OCS configuration is done. Basically, your local configuration and your PF configuration pertaining to OCS is done. Now, the online charging basically also includes the different DCC templates. That okay, the communication between the GDS and OCS has been configured, but basically what information is going to be exchanged based on which template, what parameters and all that. So those are basically configured in the DCC template. Okay. So this is what this a charging template basically looks like. You basically configure an OCS group, authentication parameter, OCS faults, thresholds, trigger parameters, the message content, and then action for a result code. And this is how your configuration, your your charging basically happens. So you configure charging template based on service scenario. Then you configure the charging template selection mode, and then you adjust the charging parameters in this charging template. So we're going to have that way of these incentives. So there are two types of DCC templates in any DGSN. One is your global DCC template, which is usually by default, and when you're configuring a DGSN, you configure a global DCC template. And then you can add some customized DCC template as well, which can call template 1, 2, and 3. Components of a DCC template, they have OCS level group parameters, support our thresholds, different triggers, which indicate the when CCR should be sent, timer parameters, processing actions, and all that. Okay, so these are different parameters that we go to the template. Okay, so your DCC template. So once you have your DCC templates configured, so what is the priority of? Because if you're going to look into the configuration and you some subscriber attribute has a DCC template, your APN can be bound to a DCC template, your charging characteristic can be bound to a DCC template, and then you have a global template. So the priority of which DCC template to be selected is like this. Highest priority is subscriber attribute. If your subscriber attribute or your what subscriber attribute means is your user profile. So if you have bound a DCC template with a user profile, that is going to take the highest priority. It is going to ignore which template was bound to APN or charging characteristic. Then comes the priority of APN, then the charging characteristic, and if nothing of sort has been bound in your flow, then you're going to follow what the global DCC template states. Okay. So you can bind a DCC template to a subscriber attribute, an APN, or a charging characteristic. A DCC template bound to a subscriber attribute or a user profile has the highest priority, whereas a global DCC template has the lowest priority. And if no DCC template is bound, then you're going to use the template bound to the APN used by the subscriber is used. Okay, and if no DC template bound to the APN, then the template that is bound to your charging characteristic is used. And if no DCC template bound to the APN charging characteristic, then finally the global DCC template is used. So how do you configure a DCC template? Like I mentioned, the global DCC template is there by default. So adding a customized DCC template, this is the command, add DCC template name, and then you add certain parameters to it. You add the QCP, the VQP, and all that. I'm going to define these, explain these parameters shortly. And if you need to modify, make any changes in the global DCC template, then you use the mod DCC template. Global template cannot be added. It's added by default. So you modify the DCC template to make changes in the global DCC template. So it's done like this. Modify DCC template and then you will modify the whatever changes you need to specify. Okay. So these are some parameters that you're going to come across when you're configuring a DCC template. Okay. The first one is the valid time, which is the quota validity time. It can be set to 0 or an integer from 5 to 14. So it's configured in minutes. Okay. And after this valid time expires, the UGW must immediately report the quota user to OCS server. And if it is set to 0, then there is no limit to the validity period. QCP is quota consumption time. This is the time in which the quota needs to be consumed. Okay. And it's mentioned in seconds. If the duration without data traffic reaches threshold, the UW suspends the charging. In QHD is the quota holding time. Okay, so quota holding time again defined in seconds, and its significance is that after the data transmission stops, when the QHD reaches the threshold, the user have to report the quota used to the OCS server. Okay, for example, you are assigned a quota, and with that quota you have a QHD. So that is the time of the quota holding. For example, you are assigned 125 Mbps, 125 MB, and you have not, and your QHD is maybe let's say 10 seconds. So if within 10 seconds, I mean, you do browsing for 5 seconds, and after 5 seconds you have consumed 50 MB. Okay, so after 5 seconds, the rest 5 seconds do not do any transmission and this QHD is hold, then the user will forcefully send the quota user report to the OCS server. If it is set to 0, then there is no QHD. VQT is the volume quota threshold and it is defined in the percentage. Its significance is that when a data packet arrives, the GGSN calculate the remaining volume quota. If the quota is smaller than this threshold, then GGSN sends a CCR message. Okay. So I mean, if it's mentioned 10%. So if your remaining quota is volume is 10%, then the GGSN is going to send another CCR message to the OCS and it is going to request for new quota. Similar is your time quota threshold. It is basically a time which specifies for new quota to be requested. If the remaining quota time is smaller or equal to this threshold, the GGSN is going to send a CCR message request. So these two parameters indicate that when a CCR message is going to be sent for updated quota request to. Okay, so this is how you configure. You basically bind a DCC template. So if you want to bind it with a user profile, you use this command, you binding a user profile to DCC template. If you're going to bind to an APN, then in the APN charge control, you can bind that template to APN. And if you need to add it to a charging characteristic, then this is the command where you bind it, a charge characteristic is bind to a DCC template. So all these three commands are basically configurable, whereby you can bind a DCC template to a user profile, an APN, and a charge characteristic. And then based on this, then your user creates a session. It is going to be assigned a DCC template based on this. Right. So next is how is an OCS selected? Okay. So the local configuration selection policy states that, okay, the user profile configuration has the highest priority. Okay, then you have the APN configuration, then you have the charging characteristic configuration, and then you have the cloud user configuration. Okay. If the OCS group name server on triple server cannot be obtained, use the local OCS group name. Okay. And sometimes the triple and PCRF server is configured with the OCS group. Okay. So there are multiple methods by which your OCS can be selected based on the priority of which of where the OCS is configured. Okay, so this is how it goes. The OCS group is selected based on the priority. If a higher priority OCS group is not configured, select a lower priority. So AAA server has the highest priority. Then you have the user profile. If an OCS is by the user profile, it is going to use this. If it's not configured here, then the APN configuration. If it's not configured there, then the charging characteristics. And even if it's not configured there, then you're going to look into the default UW configuration in which OCS has been configured, and that is then going to be selected to provide service to the specific user. Right? So how to configure an OCS? So this is how your DCC template. This is a DCC template, and a DCC template. You are assigning the what is the primary OCS group name and what is the secondary group OCS group name. Okay, so if it's selected based on DCC template, so primary OCS is this one. If the service cannot be provided by this, then the service will be provided by this OCS group 2, which is the secondary. Okay, and this is for global DCC template, and this is for a user-defined DCC template. Okay, so which DCC template is selected? The priority we already discussed, and based on that priority, which DCC template selected, then the corresponding OCS group is selected accordingly. Right. These are some optional configurations. Okay, I mean, if you need to configure when OCS service is faulty, so what action needs to be done? So here the set OCS action down is to specify whether the UGW activates a subscriber when the interworking OCS fails during subscriber activation. Okay, action can be permit, forbid, or inherit. I mean, if OCS is down and the user sends an activation request, so what can UGW do? So this is configurable. Okay, like, and that is configured with specific to your DCC template. So if you want to make changes in DCC, the global DCC template, then you can specify that, okay, you can permit the activation, or forbid means it will not allow the session to be created. And inherit is usually used when you're doing the configuration to user-defined DCC template. If it's inherit means that you're going to use whatever value is configured in global DCC. Okay, so this command can be used to configure whether you want to allow the service when the OCS is down, or you want to stop the service when OCS service is down. These are the different values of the quotas and the different configuration of parameters which we discussed. These are again bind to a DCC template. So you can modify a DCC template, a global one. So you can specify what will be going to be the volume quota threshold, what is going to be the time quota threshold, what is going to be the validity time, the quota consumption time, and the quota holding time. So this can be done for the global template, and this can be done for your user-defined template as well. And basically, these are the parameters which are negotiated and which are agreed upon by your peer OCS team. So you discuss with them that which parameters are going to be set, because these are the parameters based on which you're going to frequently be sending the CCR request and the CCA. So if you have a link, a very link capacity issue, then maybe you increase the value of the volume, the VQT and the TQT and all that. Okay, the consumption time and the holding time. And if you want frequent communication between OCS and PGSM, then obviously you can decrease the values of the consumption time and the holding time. Right. So this is something that is repeating. Okay, we're gonna go forward. Okay. Next is the trigger parameters. So when does a CCR get triggered? One is when your quota threshold has been reached. Okay, you define that, okay, 10% is the volume quota threshold. So if I am assigned 125 MB and only 12 MB is left, then this is the time where my CCR is going to be initiated towards OCS. But there are other trigger conditions as well, based on which a new CR is going to be initiated towards the OCS. So these include RAT change, if your RAT type changes, if your SGSN IP changes, if your quality service changes, or your user location changes, time zone changes, MNC changes, lag changes. Okay. So based on that, you can make the changes in the DCC templates, whether it's global one or the user-defined one, and then here you can mention based on which trigger conditions CCR should be sent. This is essentially required by basically you have location-based policies, you have 2G, 3G-based policies, you have different SDSN-based policies and all that. So these need to be updated to the OCS if any of these if the parameters are changed. Okay. So this is configuring automatic recovery parameters. Okay, run mod. So this is basically related to the automatic restoration of online charging services in DCC template. Okay, so you can basically specify whether online charging recovery needs to be enabled, and you can mention the recover interval time in which uh, your online charging is going to be enabled after your OCS is recovered. Okay. So this part covered basically the DCC template, how to configure a DCC template, what were the different components of a DCC template, and basically the priority of selecting which DCC template is selected and which OCS is selected based on it, on the priority that we discussed earlier. Next, we're going to look into the charging mechanism selection. So charging mechanism selection basically specifies that, okay, how your online charging configurations are flexibly deployed. Okay, so your online charging selection priority is basically in this sequence. The highest, your lowest priority is by uh, PCRF is uh, 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 PCRF has basically the lowest priority. Then you have the charging method base. Then you have the AAA base, and then finally is the user profile specific charging methodology. Okay, and your online charging selection, and if you're going to look into how it's done with specific to APN, so APN has APN your specific charging method, which has the priority, then the parameter that has more priority, and that is your CC specific charging method, and then your charging method for free services gets the highest priority. So if you are requesting for a service that falls in the free service category, then that is going to have the highest priority. Then the lower one, if it doesn't match here, it is going to come over here. If it doesn't match, it's going to come over here. If it doesn't match in APN, then the charging, then the profile specific, then the triple and all that. So least one is PCRF, and the highest priority is that of free service. Okay, so charging mode is selected based on following items: subscriber types, user profile, APN, charging characteristic, and free service. Right. So online charging and offline charging, you can specify for local roaming subscribers. Okay, so set charge control for visitors. You can specify whether it should be online charging or offline charging. So here we mentioned there's online charging. For home subscriber, it's going to be both online and offline, which means that you're going to communicate with OCS and you're going to create CSRs. And for users that are roaming, it's going to be only online charging. Similarly, when you are configuring a user profile, you can specify whether the online charging and offline charging needs to be done. So you have an online switch which is enabled and offline switch which is enabled. Okay, and you have the option of basically disabling online and offline charging based on user profile as well. Similarly, you have the option of enabling and disabling the online and offline charging based on APN as well. So it's command is set APN charge control. And next one is basically based on your charging characteristics. Okay, so based on specific charging characteristics, you can specify whether online is enabled, disabled, your offline is enabled or disabled. Okay, and then you can also do it based on the CC value as well. So on specific CC value, what needs to be done, online will be disabled and offline is going to be enabled. Okay, the following online offline chargings are listed in descending order by priority. Okay, so this is the descending order. Like we already discussed it earlier as well. So PCRF has the least priority. Then you have cloud UWB, cloud control, and then the its charging control setting, the radius delivered OCS service group, the user profile, APN specific, and charging characteristics. If the setting of a priority level enables the setting of the lower priority level is used, okay, Rather, I think it's in descending order. So it's the PCRF takes the highest priority. Okay, let me correct it. The PCRF gets the highest. The PCRF delivered OCS group has the highest priority, and your charging characteristic has the lowest priority. So it's so it's going to be like this: the highest priority, and then the lower priority, and then the lower priority, because it's in descending order. Because it's basically depends on which vendor PGSN you are using. So specifically for uh, Huawei base, it's basically based on PCRF has the highest priority and the charging characteristics has the lowest priority. Right, next come the configuration examples. Okay, so this is how you're going to configure a Jiva local information, specify the host name, real name, then the OCS server information. You're going to mention the name of the OCS, you're going to mention real name, and you're going to mention a VPN instance. Then you have to map that host name with an IP address. Then you link your OCS with your local PGSN name, and then you can figure basically a group and you add different OCSs into this OCS group. Next, you can add a DCC template, and in the DCC template, you mention that what is the primary OCS group, and you have the option of adding a secondary group. You can add different parameters pertaining to your DCC template like QCT, QHT, VQT, TQT, and then you bind a DCC template to an APN. So this is how you bind it, that APN charge control, and then you can specify whether online and offline charging needs to be done or not. So charge control, visit offline and home press. So this is an example. It can be based on the global configuration, based on APN configuration. It can be based on your user profile configuration as well. So you have a lot of flexibility of how to whether to enable online and offline. Yeah, charging or not. Fine. So this part was related to GUI configuration. I hope it added to your knowledge. And if there is something that I missed or there's something that you did not understand, you can feel free to discuss with me one to one. Okay. So thank you very much. Hope you have a nice time learning about GUI configuration. Okay. Thank you. Take care.